this video, we're going to reduce or enlarge a rectangle. So in an effort to save time and also confusion on drawing here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just draw a rectangle in. Oops. Let's try and keep it somewhat square on your screen. So I'm just going to draw a rectangle. Sorry, my ruler keeps moving there, guys. My apologies. So let's go from 6. Let's just say to 9.5 there. Okay. And I'm just going to square that down. To me, it doesn't really matter the size of this, because this method works with whatever you're doing, right? Whatever size your rectangle is. So I have that. Now right now I don't know, they're not the same length, right? You can visually see that. So what I'm actually going to do here is, this is where basically using my compass as a tape measure, I'm just going to measure out this distance here. Right, so I have that set at that point, and I'm just going to come to this point, sit on the same point, and just put a little mark down there. So now with the compass, I know that this side here is the same as this side here. Okay. So instead, I just used my compass as a tape measure, drew that down. And now when I connect these points, these lines are both parallel. So I'm going to have a pretty accurate square. Okay. Now my ruler did move a bit on that bottom corner, but that won't affect the process. That's okay. We can keep moving. So, of course, we could geometrically construct this square as well. But just to save a bit of time in this video, I decided to start with a rectangle, and we're just going to shrink it, and then we'll also grow it just to see how this process goes. So first up, we don't know how big this side is, and quite frankly, it doesn't concern me right now. Let's just say the first step here, we're going to shrink this line down, and I'm going to do this first one in orange. We're going to shrink it down so that this side here becomes 1 inch. Okay, but we want to keep the proportions of that rectangle. So what that means is I'm going to set my compass, bring it up here. I'm going to set my compass up to 1 inch. So I set my compass on 0, set the point on 0, and then I shrink my compass up to 1 inch. And there we go. Okay, so I'm set up to 1 inch. Now what I want to do is I want to construct a parallel line to the baseline here, right? So I draw a parallel mark there, and then another parallel mark there. So to continue on with orange, what I'm going to do is now I'm going to connect those two parallel lines, or those two marks, to construct a parallel line across this rectangle that is at my new height of 1 inch, right? So I started with a rectangle, it looks like it was probably 1.5, 1 5/8 kind of thing, but I want to shrink that down to just be 1 inch in height, but I want to keep the same ratio for the length, right? So when I shrink the 1 inch down, I want to shrink this length by a proportionate amount to keep the rectangle in the same proportion. So what that is going to lead us to is, you see a nice contrasting color here. Let's see if I can use purple. So the next step to do here is I want to draw a diagonal across this rectangle, the original rectangle. So I'm going to take my straight edge here, and I'm just going to go right across this rectangle and draw this. I'm going to carry this right out, because you'll see why when we get to the next part where I'm going to enlarge the rectangle. You'll see why it makes sense to make that big. But we don't have to. I could have very easily stopped this anywhere after this intersection right here. I could have stopped that diagonal line anywhere here if my only goal was to reduce this rectangle. So now what I have is I have an intersecting point here, and I have an intersecting point here. So I want to set the compass up to that radius. Right? I set it up to that radius from where that diagonal line meets my parallel line and then out to the edge of our rectangle. Now that I have that radius set, I'm going to come down to the bottom point here by flipping the compass, and I'm going to mark that same distance in down here. And what that does, keeping with my orange here, grab my straight edge, and now when I go from this point down to the bottom here, now I have this rectangle here that has a height of 1 inch is perfectly proportional to the original rectangle that I had. Okay? That's how you shrink a rectangle. Now the same process works for growing a rectangle. Let's say I want to increase this rectangle so it's, let's just kind of gauge this out here. Let's say I want it up to 2.5 inches instead. Okay? So to start, let's start the same way. I'm going to grab my compass. I'm going to draw my parallel line. So I set my compass at 0. And then I increase it to the radius of 2.5 inches, which is the new rectangle I want to draw. Oops. Slipped on me a bit there. So I got that up now. A little bit off my 0. There we go. 2.5 inches. Right? Now, same process for this bottom corner here. I'm going to draw an arc at my new height that I want. But to keep going here, what I need to do is I need to extend that original line. So this line here, I need to lengthen it to at least be that 2.5 inches. I went a little bit past just so I'd have a very defined point there. Okay, so next up here, what I want to do is draw a parallel line. Now I don't have this line here, which I could in theory extend up and arc and cross with this point here, but I don't really want to do that right now. I could, not going to make a difference, but I still have this compass set at my 2.5 inches. So I'm going to draw another arc just like that, which I can now draw across my parallel line to the baseline, which will basically become my new rectangle. And I'm going to carry that line right out to this point, right out to intersect that diagonal distance. Now I need to repeat what I did below. Because the new rectangle was smaller, I just was able to go inside of it. But now I want to do the same thing. I want to get this horizontal distance out to this point. So to do that, what I need to do is I need to extend this line right here. So I'm just going to extend this with black, and I'll use a dotted line or a hidden line. Okay, that's just me extending that line out. So now I can set my radius on this point here and set my radius to be out to this point where my new parallel line up top intersects and meets that diagonal line. Now that I have that, I can draw in an arc here, which will give me a parallel line to this edge of the rectangle. But now I have a problem down here. I need to connect this out somehow. Lots of ways you could do this. One is I could set up my compass and just set the radius back to my 2.5 inches, right, that I want. Right, so I'm set at my 2.5 inches, and then I could just come again up to this intersection here, right, up where these meet, and I could just draw an arc that intersects at that point, right, and then I could just connect down and connect across, and that would be the rectangle. The other option at this point, of course, is you could just extend that baseline out, right? Because you have the straight edge or the line there already. So we could just extend that out to meet that point, and then now we can just drop down this point, which now we have a perfectly proportioned rectangle that is bigger than the original rectangle that we started with. Okay? And that is how we reduce or enlarge a rectangle while maintaining its proportions.